Hi, so at today's video, I wanted to talk about how I work with students who are just learning major scales and minor scales and the difference between them. So I'm thinking an early level theory student who's just going to concentrate on major scales and then maybe harmonic minor as their sort of their first version of the minor scale that they're learning. Um, so the first thing is when I teach students major scales, I assume that they're first coming from a five-finger scale basis, which would be probably common for a lot of piano students to learn first. Um, Now I do focus on some patterns of whole steps and half steps between notes, but I break up even the full 7-note scale. I break up into what I call the core. So this is the five-finger scale, right? And then what I would call specifically the extension notes. So 6 and 7, and then the top half of the scale. Now, the reason I do that is because they're likely to be much more comfortable focusing in on that five-finger scale first. And they'll have a good sense of some of the basic ones like probably the easy keys, so C major, G major, maybe F major. Um, if we're focusing on half steps and whole steps, that means the only thing they've got to remember is that there's a half step between 3 and 4 in a major scale. And that's it. Everything else in the core is going to be a whole step. Similarly, when they focus on the extension, right, I like them to think of 7 being a step underneath 5. So this is the other half step they need to know. And 6 is a whole step above 5. And 7 is a half step underneath. I find that when they break it up into these different locations, it doesn't just seem so repetitive where they have to memorize whole, half, whole, half. They can say, I know exactly where the 2 half step distances are located, and everything else is a whole step. That tends to be much easier to chunk in memory. Secondly, when they focus on the five-finger core as being kind of that, the core or the skeleton of the scale, that really highlights in their mind that scale step 1 and scale step 5 are really like the big marker points, right? And then they're getting that coming back reinforced when they think about these extension notes, right? We're going up from 5 to 1, or between 1 and 5 for the core. All right, now the real payoff of this is when you go to learning minor scales and concentrating on that. So when we see how those are built, I teach this again using the idea of you have a core of the scale, and then you have step 6 and step 7 as extensions of that core. So when I teach minor, so for instance, here we've got our G major scale. So there's our core, our extension. When it comes to learning minor, you can either think about, I think the easiest thing is to think of lowering scale step 3. Usually that's going to be with a flat. Sometimes it's going to be with a natural, depending on what's in your key signature here. So here in G minor, you think about, well, in the core, to make a minor core, you're going to lower scale step 3. If they also want to think about where the half step is, the half step has shifted to being between 2 and 3 right here. But I find that most students, since they're coming from a knowledge of major, it's really easy just to think of that, lowering that scale step 3 in the core. Now, as I said, the real payoff for thinking about core versus extension is when they get to learning minor scales. This makes harmonic minor very easy, at least to remember the guidelines to construct this. So your five-finger core, all you're going to do is change scale step 3. And then the only thing you have to remember is the 2 extension notes are a half step. So 6 is a half step above 5, and 7 is a half step below 1. So harmonic minor is all about having your two extensions be half steps away from 5 and from 1. That way I find that they're much more reliable thinking about how to build that minor scale. All right, thanks for joining me.